start with one thing. I think there is one way of saying what is happening. There is another importance behind this of what is happening so that we know what we're doing. The reason why I started by talking about the crisis of Middle East, and this crisis is actually portrayed now today in this scenario with regard to Iran, or talking about what happened with regard to Syria or Lebanon or the situation which is in Palestine and what is Israel is doing, is because there's a fundamental issue with regard to crisis in Middle East. That has not been resolved. When the Berlin Wall fell down, the idea was something different. It continued and became something different. So it is an old thing. This crisis has not been resolved. And because it's not resolved, that keeps coming up in different scenarios, in different situations, with different answers in different locations. That's on one point. One of the major points with regard to that crisis is the issue of Palestine. The issue of Palestine needs to be resolved, one way or the other. Israel is actually portraying one way, but it has to be resolved. And the resolution of it is not just because there is no such thing as called land of Palestine. The problem is that the whole Arab world, if you like, from the region, needs an answer. The degradation that they felt needs an answer. And if it doesn't find an answer, something else will brew somewhere else. That's one thing. But why am I pointing to this rather than a historical issue, but more of a case because it has an impact today? Because different states in the region, when it comes to issues of crisis, we saw it during the time of Saddam attack on Kuwait. We see it another way in different scenarios today. Each of these states, to some extent, are expressing themselves and putting their hands on something which is a problem in this region. Israel is saying the problem in this region is the tyranny of the Islamic Republic. Now that rings a bell amongst many. Iran puts the stress on the problems that Israel calls on the issue of the Palestine and the subjugation of Palestinian people and complete degradation, further than that, destruction and carnage that is taking place on Palestinian people. That rings a bell in the Middle East. So each of them is trying to use something that is actually the need or the requirement or an expression, irrespective of whether it is true or not, but it is an issue which is risen in the region. And each of them, therefore, tries to portray itself as a savior. Iran portrays itself as the only force that is actually trying to fight Israel, this one that cannot be controlled. And this is the reason why I said when you saw everywhere else, suddenly the flags of the Islamic Republic goes up. And similarly, when it comes to Israel, is putting his hands on something from Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, Hamas, Yemen, etc., which is something which people in the region have also seen as well. So that's what they're doing. They effectively are providing their own answers, irrespective of whether I agree or disagree, but I'm saying there are issues in there which are socially raised. Now, the issue of Palestine is continuing, and the carnage and genocide is continuing. What can we do? Do something from the international point of view, across everywhere, and the working class from France, US, etc., Italy, and everywhere else who actually have been doing something with regard to pause and stopping them on one hand, and at the same time, in Middle East, we've got to do something. So therefore, the idea was to provide a workers' front in there to put a voice which is different to what is being said in the region. That's one thing. Second point, when it comes to the issue, it was clear, I think everybody knew this, it wasn't the Islamic Republic that wanted a full-fledged force. It was clear. It was Israel that was pushing for war. Israel and Netanyahu at this moment does need a war. But I think it goes beyond Netanyahu. That's why I mentioned Naftali, who was the previous prime minister. Before all of these right wings come in place, he said, we got to go for the head of the octopus, which is Iran. Now, to say that this is only an issue, I know that Netanyahu has got a role to play in this. But to actually limit it to Netanyahu, I think this is another issue. If Netanyahu goes away, the next one is still on the same brand. The actual state in Israel is, I quite agree, as an outpost, as a point of presence in the region, is actually portraying certain positions and is also carrying out those positions. So from that point of view, Israel is following a policy. And this policy of war in the region is something which is at the moment has come into contradiction with what many of those reactionary states in the region do not want. There is no way Saudi Arabia can think about its expansion and its program of 2030, etc., if the whole Middle East is in arms and is in burning in place. It doesn't mean that they agree with Iran or they agree with Israel. It's just that the whole Arab bourgeoisie, the whole of those states, are seeing problems with the policies that are taking place. That is real. So therefore, the question is, our answer to this is, with regard to the situation, like the attacks which is taking place in Iran, Islamic Republic does not want a war, but a war is not something that it actually sees as its downfall. That's not the case. Everyone knows it's not the downfall of the Islamic Republic. It's not regime change. Israel puts all that rhetoric. The question is not regime change. They will come to the aid of Islamic Republic because the bourgeoisie in Iran doesn't have any alternative. It's the best alternative they got. The question is bringing it to the table and accepting something. But I think that's the tactics of the day. So what is our position? Our fight in terms of what Roger mentioned in terms of the working class has not ceased. We are still on the same thing. We had two things. One, we condemn this war, but further than that, we want an end to it. Two, we want a complete, if you like, producing a dam right in front of the Islamic Republic against any further pressure and transferring the problems that are onto Iran. Why is that important? Because right now the Islamic Republic has been going on and has been using an excuse. The reason why there is problems, the reason why factories are closing, the reason why there is a poverty, the reason why there is an economic problem is because of the economic embargo. Today, they're saying the reason why we have this problem is because of the attack of the Israel. So therefore, that's another excuse that they got in their hand, which they didn't have previously. We had 8 years of war with Iraq, 1 million dead. We have had that experience of what the war does in terms of not the protests that are not taking place, but sidelining it because it gives an upper hand to the state. So the reason why I was saying why there would be the idea of the nationalism is because Islamic Republic is picking up the pretext of territorial integrity of Iran, because they do know, and that is absolutely true, that there are very many of these pockets of groups of nationalists, etc., that exist in Iran that Israel would arm. So they're actually saying, if we are there, we can control this. And therefore they're going for this idea of nationalism in terms of the integrity of, or if you like, territorial integrity of Iran on one hand, two, the force that can stop Israel. The question is, what is our job? We are not the socialists of the time when everything is good and rosy and peaceful. Whether it is rosy or it's not rosy, whether it is war or not war, our routine task doesn't change. What is actually taking place is knowing what they're actually putting as a pretext, therefore we can actually arm against it. What are the things we want? No drop in the current status. We do not agree that the problem of poverty is because of the embargo, although that's an excuse in the Islamic Republic. That's why we wanted to break the economic embargo, because it takes that excuse away. Two, there is no such thing as the Islamic Republic being able to actually withstand this, when I say militarily, because the situation is not a military and doesn't have a military solution. The militarism that is actually taking place across the world, that militarism, the failure of that is actually, the victim of that is the people in Iran at the moment. Similarly, as it was the problem of inability to resolve the issue of the crisis in the Middle East, the Palestinian people have paid for it. The idea behind it is, what do we do? Obviously, our work in terms of struggle, organization, etc., routine work is there, but recognizing the situation has changed. War is not something that would help us. So therefore, we need to make sure that we are actually able to stand against not only the Islamic Republic, but also the right-wing nationalist ones that are actually coming under the name of anti-Islamic Republic and are pro-Israel. And they want a situation like this because that's the only way they can see their role into power. They would not get into power if there are a proper, if you like, free elections in Iran. They would not get into power if it is the case that people have got the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, so therefore they can organize. That's not the way. The only way they can get into power is if there is mayhem. So our job against this right, pro-Israeli, war-seeking opposition is crucial. So that's one of our tasks. 2, identifying and seeking, or if you like, calling on the working class globally to say people in Iran needs defending. Defending not because they are poor, but defending because there is a need to stand against this militarism and its breakdown and the attack that Israel is carrying out and the alternative they're putting for Middle East. So standing up against Israel, expressing solidarity with people who are actually under this new agenda which is taking place across Middle East. Standing against Israel, I think to a large extent, is what we're after. But at the same time, those who actually try to make this a two-polar thing, is it Islamic Republic or is it Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran or Israel, neither of them will provide an answer. The thing about it is, how could we stand against it? I think is to recognize end of the war. End of the war, immediate end of the war, disarms many of the two sides. So therefore, immediate call for an end to the war, immediate end for bombardment, immediate end for tick-for-tack responses. These are the things which I think are crucial. Situation could change. I think this is clear. No one knows how it's going to change. But I think, is it in our favor? In other words, do we think out of the war we would be in better situation than not the war? I think not the war would be a better situation. But in any case, our job is to change whatever is current rather than doing this. But knowing what is going on, I think, is a great help to know what we're doing better.